Alright, now that we've shown you how to simply define our sine, cosine, and tangent functions, and how that they can be related, let's work on a few manipulations of these functions. So, if I want to define any length of this triangle, we'll call it triangle ABC because I don't have any clever names for these things, what we'll have to do, well, is we'll have to use our trigonometric functions. Let's say we only know, let's say that we only know this side C. I'll use a different color for that. Let's say we only know this guy. Alright, but I want to define A. How can I go about doing that? Well, I can see that A is adjacent to angle theta. And we have an equation that defines just these two variables, and it's called cosine theta. Cosine theta, as we just mentioned, is equal to A over C. Well, if I look at this like any other equation, I can see that if I multiply both sides by C, then I will have a function C cosine theta equals A. Now, this might not seem like much, but we want to make sure that we denote this principle in that we can define all of our sides like this. If I wanted to define B, and all I know is C, well then I would say that sine of theta is equal to B divided by C, and I can multiply both of these sides by C and receive the function C sine theta is equal to B. Now what we've done here is I've come up with two equations that define two separate sides, A and B, using two variables that we already knew. We already knew the angle in between, and we already knew the side of the hypotenuse. We knew the length of the hypotenuse. Now, we could do the same thing, right? If we use the same principles, we can define the angle, or we can define the side C the same way. Let's say we want to define C. I'll use blue for this. Let's say we want to define C, but all we know is A, right? Well, I come back to my cosine function equals A divided by C, and I say, well, I want to isolate C. So first step, nice and simple, multiply by C. So I say C cosine theta is equal to A. Well, that's close to what I want, but now I see that all I need to do, but now I see that I need this, right? So all I need to do then is divide both sides by cosine. Now, some people, as a side note, I wanted to say real quick that if you look at this, just to note, if you look at this, divide by cosine theta over here, it's the same thing. Dividing by cosine theta is the same thing as multiplying by 1 over cosine theta. That might come in handy later when you're trying to rearrange your equations, but I just want to make that a side note for now. Anyway, so we divide by cosine theta and we find that C is now equal to A over cosine theta. Now, similar methodology can be used to define both our, or it can be used with both our tangent function and our sine function, where sine, I'll go through this quickly, will be used to define C relative to B. And if I use the same steps, first multiplying over by C and then dividing by sine, you'll find that C, when defined by sine, is equal to B over, move this up here, sine theta. Okay?